This session is on the design library. And if you've never used the design library or you've wondered about it, in the next hour you're going to see everything you need to know to be able to go back and start taking advantage of it. And if you do use it, it can really save you a lot of time in your day-to-day designing. As I was thinking about content for today to illustrate the design library, I thought back to the years I used to work as a CNC programmer. And we machined a lot of parts like this. They didn't require a fixture. We could just use a standard table setup with standard components like blocks and pushers and clamps. And we'd run a lot of parts, tear down, and set up for another run of parts. And so I plan to use these parts to illustrate the design library today. And when we're discussing features, I plan to use this slot in the table. And as we're discussing sketches, we're going to use an extruded text, some sketch text. And when we start talking about parts, we use some of these standard setup equipment, blocks and bolts and related parts. The design library consists of folders, either on your local machine or on a network location, where you save things that you want to reuse. In the case of parts are just copied to those folders as part files. As far as features and sketches goes, they're saved as a special type of part called a library feature part. And why is this important and how can you benefit from this? Well, there's several reasons. If you, as far as parts go, if you put parts in a library, it's very easy to find those parts when you want to use them. And if you add mate references, which I'm going to go over this afternoon, they may automatically snap into position, automatically mate, which can save you a lot of time. As far as features and sketches, we can save a lot of time by not having to redraw the same geometry over and over. We access the design library through the task pane. And the task pane is located over here. The second icon looks like a set of books. When SOLIDWORKS is installed, a default design library is loaded. And I would suggest that you use the default library as an example. And this is true of any customization you do, whether it be template files, document templates, bill of materials, whatever. You should create your own folders, put your stuff in your folders, and then point to your folders.
Can you share that information, like on a network?
Yes, this can be a network location, either a network location or your own local computer, either way. So how do we add our file locations? Well, there's two ways. You can either do it through an icon in the task pane, or you can go through system options. As far as the task pane goes, there is an icon that says Add File Location. And then you just search, and again, this is either on your local machine or a network shared location. You just point to that folder, and right now, I've got one called Library. It's empty. There's nothing in it right now. The other way is through your options. Under System Options, File Locations, if you look under Design Library, there's the one that I just added, and there's the default file location. Before we continue, I want to just take a quick moment to review the task pane. This is introductory level session, so some of you may not know all of this. If you don't want it to collapse every time you click off of it, it can be pinned. It can be dragged off of its docked position. If you use dual monitors, you can place it on a second monitor. If it's floating on the screen and it's not pinned, it will collapse or expand. It is a toolbar, and you can actually turn the task pane on and off like you would any other toolbar. It can only be docked in one position, and that is over on the right-hand side, as you see. I am going to be opening a lot of files as we go through this session this afternoon, and I plan to use File Explorer, which is the icon right below Design Library, so I point that out so you don't get confused between those two things. In our discussion today, we're going to be looking at reusing features, sketches, and parts. And the feature that I plan to use is this slot that's in the table, that's in that part. A library feature is a frequently used feature or combination of features that you model once, save to the library, and then go reuse whenever you need it. There are two schools of thought concerning the placement of these library features. One, leave the sketch underdefined with no references at all to the geometry outside of it. And then when you insert it, edit the sketch then to locate it. Second school of thought is fully define your sketch so it has references to the rest of the part, and then use those references when you insert it. Now, I'm going to go over both of these methods. The first one we're going to look at is a sketch that is underdefined. And if we edit this sketch and go normal to it, you can see there's some dimensions. If I turn on sketch relations, quite a few sketch relations, but the sketch is not related to the rest of the part at all. It's completely unreferenced. So this is the first school of thought, one way that you can go about this. So how do we create a library feature out of this geometry? There's three ways. I'm going to show you all three before the afternoon's over. You can do a save as, or you can use the task pane, either an icon in the task pane or just drag it and drop it to the task pane. First method we're going to look at is doing a file save as, which is what this is a screen capture of. We select the feature or features, could be multiple features, in the tree. We do a save as. We change the type to a library feature part. Features and sketches are a unique type of part. We point to our folder where we want to save it, give it a name, and optionally add a description. The description is going to be the tooltip when you hover over it in the task pane. The description is also entered as a custom property. And so really any time at all, if you want to modify the tooltip in the task pane, you can just come back and change this description property. Now that we've saved it as a library feature part, it has a special extension, as you can see up at the top, SOLIDWORKS LFP, library feature part. The first line in the tree has a different kind of an indication on it. It looks like a set of books. And this is probably going to be hard to see, but the feature that we actually saved to the library has an L on it, on the icon beside it. And that's just to distinguish it from the non-library features. So now that we have it, how do we insert this or reuse this later in another file? We drag it from the task pane, drop it into the graphics area, and then select our options from the property manager. I'm going to open up the machine table that I had earlier open with all the setup equipment on it. We go to the library, find our feature, drag it, and you can drop it on any face or plane. The first entry, the placement plane, is where we dropped it. If that's not where you want it, you can just clear that selection and place it somewhere else. Configurations are supported. I'm going to show you how that works in a minute. We can link it to the library. We're going to go over that. Since this is an unreferenced sketch, the way we locate it is at this point we edit the sketch and position it where we want it to go. And I'll just drag it up to the top edge and add a dimension.
Since you have vertical relations, would it also work if you do it on the top?
It works on the top too. It may get rotated differently, but it's just a sketch then that you can reorient at that point. The dimensions that control that feature are listed here, and at this point you can override them if you want, and we'll talk about that in just a minute too. So the steps are, you have a part, you want to reuse this feature, we drag it, we drop it, we edit the sketch to locate it, and we're done. So never again are we going to have to redraw that feature from scratch. The sketching, dimensioning, sketch relations, etc. And this is where you can really save a lot of time if there are features that you reuse.
That initial extrude, that's sort of arbitrary then, just so you get the cut feature, is that?
Yes. And in the tree, library features have a special indication. You can expand it. There's the feature or features if we had more than one that make up the library. We can still edit the sketch, make any changes we want to with the sketch. We can still edit the feature, modify the feature. So in a sense, to answer your question, it's arbitrary. However, you do want it to be an extrude boss or an extrude cut, and then you could modify the depth or something like that. We can apply colors and appearances to library features several different ways, including the screen capture I have is through your document properties, a setting there. If the original feature had colors assigned to it, those would automatically come into the part you dropped it into. If not, we can edit the feature in the tree, or edit its appearance rather, like you would any other feature, modify the color or appearance. And we have a document setting. Document properties under model display, there is an option for library features. And so we can just set, in this case it would be all library features will now carry this color. And if you do it through document properties like that, that overrides any other color setting you may have applied. Library features can be dissolved. So if there's no need, and there may not be, to keep the indication that it originally came from the library, you can just right-click and dissolve the feature. And I'm going to do that to the second one. Right-click, dissolve library feature, and then it's just a feature in a sketch as if you had drawn it from scratch in this file. Of course, we lost the color because I assigned color to library features. And since that's not a library feature anymore, it doesn't carry that color. In fact, I'm going to go ahead right now and reset them all back to the default colors. And I could probably do without the PowerPoint and just go through SOLIDWORKS and show you this, but if this looks interesting, you may want to follow up with it later. The PowerPoint's what you would download, and so at least you see what it looks like. Library features can be linked, creating a reference back to the library, and it behaves like any other external reference. We drag the feature in, we drop it, edit the sketch to locate it, and then there's an option to link it to the library. And if it's linked to the library, or if it's linked, it's just an external reference, has the external reference symbol on it. We can list external references, and in this case it's pointing back to our library location. I would like to, just to distinguish this one from the others, change the color on this one that is linked. If now we choose or decide to modify the library feature, and I'm going to open it up, which is nice, you can open it up directly from its library location. What I'd like to do is cut, instead of having this flat across the bottom, I like to have just a shallow cut, say in the same location and the same width as the opening up above there. So we'll sketch a couple of lines. Mirror, trim away what we don't want. And I'm going to add a sketch relation to make these two lines collinear. And I didn't add another feature. We could have, and we'll see multiple features here shortly. I just modified this one feature that was already there, that's already part of the library. So when we save and close this, what you would expect happens. The one that is linked, updated. The one that we dissolved, that one in the middle, it's not going to change. It's just a feature in a sketch. And the first one, even though the indication is still there that it came from the library, it's not linked, so it's not going to update either.
Can you go back and change that to link?
That's a good question. Linking is something that has to be done right up front. So if you have a feature like this one that is linked, you can always go back and choose to unlink it. However, once you've inserted it, like this first one, it indicates it came from the library. Once it's inserted, you cannot go back after the fact and link it. So linking is something you need to do up front, decide whether you want it to be linked or not.
change that link within that model and have it appear in the library change?
No. Not unless you overwrote the library part. Renaming dimensions is a good thing, and not just with library features, but if you get into equations or design tables, renaming dimensions is a good idea. Because if I drag one of these in and drop it, edit the sketch to locate it, and then we decide we want to override the dimension values, we have D1, D2, D3, the default dimension names. This sketch only has 5 dimensions in it, and even with just 5, it may be confusing what those dimensions control. Imagine if you had 10 or 15 or more dimensions.
I have a question. If you drop a feature in like you did, and you change it, even though it came from the design library, is it updating what's in the design library, or is it only updating what's in it?
No, it's a one-way street. It comes from the library into your part. You can change it however you want in the part. That's not going to update the library.
But it'll link with the other ones in the part, right?
And the link is a one-way street too. If you put it in your model and it's linked to the library, the only way it's going to change is if you edit the library feature part. The only way you can edit it, and we're going to do this shortly in the part, is you have to break the link. If it's linked, it says go to the library and get it and bring it in. All dimensions have names. The dimension names can be toggled on and off from this visibility drop-down. And there's the default names, D1, D2, D3. The way you change a name is by selecting it and then just typing in the name over here in the property manager underneath primary value. So I'm just going to rename a couple. I'll call that the width, and we'll call this the depth. And you could rename all of the dimensions if you wanted to. You don't have to keep the names on, and typically we wouldn't keep the names on. Even if they're not on, you can still select them and rename them, and if you hover over them, the name appears there by your cursor. So now when we drag this in, drop it, edit the sketch to locate it, and we choose to override dimension values, now it makes sense. Oh, this is the width, and I want to modify the width. And this is the depth, and I want to modify the depth. Okay, so renaming dimensions is a good idea. Configurations are supported. And the example I plan to use is a slot, as you can see, where the width of that opening varies. And what I'd like to do is start all together with a different part. This is just a part file. Similar, but it's a different part file. This file has configurations. And as you can see, as I change from one to the other, it's really just changing the width of that opening. So there was a slide early on that said there are 3 ways to get that feature into the library. One is select the feature or features and do a save as. That I've already done. The other way is from the task pane. You select the feature or features. There's an icon in the task pane that says add to library. This is the interface we have. These are the features we selected, the name we want to call it, the folder we want to place it in, and again down here is a description, which is going to be our tooltip. References refers to assemblies. It's an option with assemblies, which we're not looking at today. And so we just added another one to our library. This has configurations. So when we drag one with configurations into our model, drag it, drop it, now it lists all of the configurations. We just select the one that we want, edit sketch, locate it, etc. Now, if you're using configurations, you may not want to dissolve the library feature, because if we dissolve it, we won't be able to modify the configuration. As long as we keep it with the indication that it came from the library, we can edit the feature and change configurations. This message is telling us that the way this is going to be accomplished is it's going to go back to the library, grab that configuration, and bring it in. And it's telling us if you've done any editing of the sketch, modifying dimensions or anything, you're going to lose those.
Now, for that one, you did not have to check off the link to library. It automatically keeps and maintains the link for the configuration.
That could be linked or not linked. You still have an option that way. A library feature can consist of multiple features. I've selected one extrude cut. You could have multiple features. They can be disjoint. In other words, they don't have to touch one another. They could even reside on different faces of your part. And you can, after the fact, go back and modify what's in the library by adding or removing features. If we go back to the original, the first one that we saved in there, and look at it, let's say we want to add some fillets. We're just going to round some of these sharp edges. If we want those fillets to be part of the library feature, we right-click and say Add to Library. And now, anytime this is dragged in from the library, it's going to have two features, the cut and the fillets. It's probably hard to see, but it put an L on the fillet also to let you know that that's part of the library. Yes, what you would expect. The one, that's why I colored it yellow, the one that we did link is always looking back to the library and bringing that library feature part in. We can delete library features like any other feature, pick it and hit delete, or right-click and delete it. So before we continue, I'd just like to do a real quick recap. We know how to access the design library through the task pane. We can add our file locations, either local files or network locations, either from the task pane or through system options. We can save our features either by saying add to library from here or doing a file save as. We drag it, we drop it on the face that we want to position it on. If we have configurations, we select the configuration. This is an unreferenced sketch, so we edit the sketch to locate it. We can override dimensional values if we want. Renaming dimensions is a good idea. We can change the color of library features. We can dissolve library features. And the last thing we looked at was the fact that we can modify them after the fact, adding or removing features.
Can you show the adding colors again?
If the color is defined in the library feature, it will bring that automatically. After the fact, you can edit the feature. You can just edit the appearance like you would any other feature, and then apply a color or texture. And then it is in the PowerPoint, this last slide. You can go to Document Properties, Model Display. There is a setting for library features where you can define all library features to be some color. That picture is in the PowerPoint. Everything we've done so far has been with a sketch that is underdefined with no references. Now what we're going to look at is the second school of thought is where you create your feature, the sketch is fully defined, adding references to the rest of the part. Behaves differently. And again, I'd like to start over with a different part altogether. Similar looking, but right now this is just a part file. I want to edit the sketch, and I'm going to attach it to the top edge. That's a coincident relation. And then just dimension it over to the left side. So I've created two references. I've referenced the top edge of the part and the left side of the part. Three ways that you can create the library feature. Select the feature or features, do a save as. We've done that. this icon in the task pane, add to library. We've done that. The third way, and that was in one of the earlier PowerPoints, is to select the features, just drag them over and drop them in this location. Same kind of interface we saw before. So those are the three different ways to create library features. So let's see what happens when we insert a library feature that has references on it. We drag it, we drop it, and over here there are a couple of in our case we reference two edges. So that's a list of all of the references we need to satisfy in this part. The preview window appears automatically, and what we need to do now is select an edge in this part that corresponds with the edge in the preview. So that would be the top edge. We get a green check, says that's okay. Now it's previewing the side. We pick the side edge. And we have a locating dimensions box, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. It's empty right now. Again, we can still override the size if we want. And that's how it behaves with references. Now, every library feature part, even the first one we created that didn't have any references per se, if you open up the part, it has these folders. There's a references folder, a dimensions folder, and under dimensions you have one for locating dimensions and internal dimensions. So this is the one that we just created, the one that has references. Here are the folders. The nice thing is SOLIDWORKS does that automatically with library feature parts. So the references are automatically listed under there. There's the top edge. There's the side edge. All of the dimensions are here. Dimensions can be dragged or dropped in and out of those other two folders. Before I do that, by the way, I said it's a good idea to rename dimensions in case you intend to maybe override them later. You can do that directly from here. I don't have to edit the sketch to rename the dimension. Just select it, pick it twice or pick it once, hit the F2 key. We can also rename the references. So instead of edge 1, edge 2, I'll call it top edge and left side. What goes in locating dimensions folder are the dimensions that you want to see in the locating dimensions folder when you insert one of these. And the only one that we have really is just one dimension. It's the one that comes off the side of the part. Just drag it and drop it into the folder. What goes in internal dimensions are dimensions that you typically don't want to change. Let's say in our case we want to be able to change the width and the depth, but the other things typically stay the same. We don't want to normally modify those. So we'll just drag, and those are all the ones that I haven't renamed. We'll just drag those and put them into this internal dimensions folder. So we have our references, the face you drop it on, the top edge, the left side. We have one locating dimension. We have two dimensions that we want to be able to modify, and the rest are internal. So now when we drop this in, it's prompting us for the top edge, the one we renamed, the left side. Here is our one locating dimension, which we can make whatever we want. And when we look at the overriding dimensions, the only two we see were the ones that were not put into the internal folder. So we can very easily say, well, I want to override the depth in this case. You can still, unless it's linked, you can still always go back with these and edit the sketch, modify any of these dimensions. They just weren't part of the initial insertion is all. Edit the sketch, edit the feature. I want to review linking for just a minute because it behaves differently if your sketches are fully defined or underdefined and not referenced. And if you're going to link, best idea is to fully define the sketches. I want to show you what happens and what the difference is. Here's our original slot. Drag it in, drop it, edit the sketch to locate it. We go back to the property manager and link it. And it has the external reference on it. It's linked. And remember, linking has to be done right up front. The problem we run into with an unreferenced sketch is now if we want to move it, when we edit the feature, we don't have any way to move it. There's no locating dimension box. You can't get back into the sketch to move it. So, and worse than that, it puts it back where you originally dropped it. So it's like, well, I need to edit the sketch, and when you edit the sketch, it says you can't do that, it's linked. If you want to edit the sketch, you've got to unlink it. So the only way to really move it now after the fact would be to unlink it, and you can unlink anytime. Edit the sketch, position it wherever you want to go, and then if you wanted it linked, you're out of luck. Linking has to be done right up front. So the problem with an unreferenced sketch is it really kind of backs you into a corner as far as relocating it later. That's not the case with a fully defined sketch with references. Drop it on a face, select your references, type in this case, the distance from the edge. We're going to link it. OK. And now if we want to move it, we can edit the feature, and we have a locating dimensions box. So every single dimension that we use to locate it, we now have access to, and we can change that. So if you choose to link it, work with a fully defined reference sketch. The last thing we're going to look at as far as features goes before we move into reusing sketches is the fact that library features can be patterned. And it would be like any other pattern. Select the feature in the tree. In this case, I'm going to do a linear pattern. I want 4 of these 6 inches apart on that face.
The first time you set that feature up, I imagine you made it cut all the way through this part.
I did a cut through, correct.
Okay, now once you drop that onto your tool, can you adjust that? Say you only want to go halfway. Can you change that?
You could cut at a blind distance.
Okay.
You could change the direction of the cut this way, that way, right? But you really want it to be a cut and not an extrude. Otherwise, you're looking at deleting the feature and redoing it. So. Applications for using a sketch, there are several. It may be that the feature is sometimes a boss, sometimes a cut. And so instead of having 2 different library features or having to edit it and modify it later, we just save the sketch to the library. Insert the sketch. And then once it's there, choose to extrude a boss, extrude a cut. Maybe it's going to be on a non-planar face. So we need to just bring in a sketch, and then that sketch is projected, or in this case, I wrapped it, and then the feature created from that. The sketch may be one of several that you plan to use for sweeping or lofting. The best example is weldment profiles. If you've done anything with weldments, you know that a weldment profile is just it is a library feature part, and if you were to open it up, it's just a sketch saved as a library feature part. And it just sweeps it actually along your lines, typically straight lines. The example I plan to use is some text. And I have a sketch, which is sketch text that I extruded. And you don't have to create a feature. In fact, if you opened up a weldment profile, there's nothing in there but a single sketch, no extrude. The only reason I made a feature out of this is just to illustrate, well, how do you capture just the sketch? And what difference does that make? So we select the sketch instead of the feature. Do a save as. It's a library feature part, special type of part. We point to our library, again, add a description. And this message comes up, and it's basically telling us that I'm going to grab just the sketch, not the feature, not the unrelated feature. This will be easier to see if I change the color, make it a little bit darker. And even though this is sketch text, which is what my intent is, you'll notice I drew a rectangle around there. It's construction geometry now. Only because, for whatever reason, when you look at the preview, you drag it and drop it, it shows lines, arcs, circles, but it doesn't preview the text, sketch text. So the rectangle is just going to make it easier to see as we insert it. So let's go back to our original machine table. There it is. Here's our new library feature, which is a sketch. Drag it, drop it, and there's the preview I was referring to. Drop it on, it behaves like features. Drop it on any face. Placement plane, configurations, if you have any, you can link it. We edit the sketch to locate it, override any sketch dimensions, which I didn't have any, and then OK. So all of that is exactly the same as features. We can still dissolve this if we want to. And then in this case, we're left with just a sketch. What I plan to do is take the sketch and extrude a boss. So that's really the main difference between features and sketches. Now what you may run into with sketches is there's two ways they can be saved. Sketches can be saved as library feature parts or as blocks. And it makes a difference if you use the task pane to create the original feature. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about this in case you should run into this situation. Not only do blocks look differently in the tree, they behave differently also. If we reopen the part file, and this time we select what we want to save to the library, which is the sketch. You can either drag it and drop it, or you can say add to library, just like with a feature. And this looks similar as it did before. The difference is, down here under options, there's two different ways to save it. Library feature part or a block. And the default is it wants to save it as a block. If you do save it as a block, it looks different in the task pane. All blocks look exactly the same as far as that icon goes. The preview shows you what's inside of there. And it behaves differently as we insert it. When we drag this block, whatever face I hover over is the face it's going to put it on. And if I'm just in the background, it's going to drop it on the face that it was sketched on originally. And you can't change it. Like if it was a library feature part, it would just change from face to face. This is just now stuck on that one face. Property Manager is a little bit different. We can scale it. We can rotate it. We drop it where we want. And it puts us into a sketch. So I'm going to exit the sketch. Now, if it's on the wrong face, there's a few different things we can do. It's already in there. If I choose now to locate it someplace else, we can always, it's just a sketch. We can edit the sketch plane, put it on a different plane. If you know you want to put it on the top face, you can either be more careful when you drop it, make sure you drop it on the top face, or you can pre-select that face, highlight it, and as long as it's highlighted, it doesn't matter now where I drop it, it's going to put it on that top face. And again, we can quickly scale it or rotate it. Puts us in a sketch mode, exit the sketch. And since it puts us in a sketch mode, that's the third way we can make sure we get it in the right place. Start a sketch on some face. And now it doesn't matter whether that face is selected or not. When we drag it in, no matter where we drop it, it's going to be on that face that we're currently sketching on. Blocks are absorbed underneath the sketch in the tree, so the feature manager looks different. We can edit the sketch, move the sketch around to locate it someplace else, go to the property manager, adjust the scale, the rotation angle. But if we want to modify the sketch and make some changes to it, we have to edit the block definition. And now we're in an edit block mode. Make your changes, get out of the edit block mode, get out of the sketch. If you look at the default design library that's loaded when SolidWorks goes in, there is an annotations folder. You can see there's several blocks in there. They all carry the same icon. If you hover over them, these look like they're electrical symbols that you would insert in a drawing. Although you can insert blocks into parts, because I've already done that a few different times, I think more typically they're used in the drawing environment. So we've looked at features, we've looked at sketches. Now let's take a look at parts. Parts that are commonly used, can be saved to a library location, and then when you need them, you just drag them and drop them into an assembly. You can organize the design library over here in the task pane however you want. I pointed to a folder called Library. You can point to other folders, again, local on your machine, network locations. You can add subfolders. So underneath Library, I'm going to create a folder, and I'll just call it Parts. So you can organize this however it makes sense to you. In the Parts folder, I've got a part. It's a bolt. And what I like to do is put that in the design library location. And I'm just going to drag it and drop it. You could do a save as and point to that folder. You could just copy it in Windows Explorer to that folder. It's just a part file, unlike features and sketches that are special types of parts. So now that part exists in our library. Here's an assembly that I want to use that part in. The main advantage to placing parts in your library is it's going to be very easy to go find them when you need them. And you've organized it the way it makes sense to you. We just then drag it and drop it. Now, it would be nice if it snapped to the holes, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, but there's several of the bolts. Kind of a side issue, smart mating, a little bit off topic, but for those of you that don't know, if we want to mate these into positions, smart mating is where you hold down the Alt key. If you pick on a circular edge, drag it and drop it, it's going to default to concentric. If you pick on a flat edge, drag it and drop it, it's going to default to coincident. If you pick a circular edge, drag it and drop it, it'll capture both of those, concentric and coincident. That's called smart mating. Configurations are supported with parts. And if a part has configurations, when you drag it in, you're going to get a list of all the configurations. Just select the one you want. Right now, this bolt doesn't have any, so I'm going to open it up, and we will add a configuration. Call it longer. We'll change the length from 2 to 4, and we're changing it just for this configuration. So we have a short bolt and a long bolt. So now when we drag it in and drop it, we get a list. These are all the configurations. And you may know configurations can be named whatever you want. They could be your part names as far as that goes. Let's say I want to insert a longer one. Or I drag one of these bolts in and I want to insert a shorter one. Okay, so configurations are supported. And if we wanted to smart mate these, it would just be Alt, circular edge, drag and drop. When I drag one of these in, now smart mating is pretty fast and easy, but it would be even better if when I drop this or when I bring it in, it would just automatically go to places it should be mated. And we can accomplish that with what's called mate references. Mate references specify the entities of a part that you want to use for automatic mating. You can have up to 3 referenced entities. If you're only going to reference one entity, the name doesn't matter. If you're going to have more than one entity, the name comes into play. And we'll see how that works. Mate references are found, or the command is found where your other reference geometry is found, planes, axes, etc. Start the command. Now, in a case like this, if I was going to mate this, if I was going to smart mate it, I really only need one reference. Like I've shown you a couple times, it would just be this circular edge. So we pick the circular edge, it puts it in here as one entity. That's all we need. Okay. The mate reference is listed over here in the tree. You could edit it, delete it later. And so now that it has that mate reference on it, when we drag it in, it's automatically snapping into holes. It's not sizing, it's just looking for concentric and coincident situations. Before I let go of my mouse, if I hit the tab key, it looks for alternate situations. Most of the time it's aligned or anti-aligned, but it could find other types of mates depending on the geometry. So we have configurations, which one do we want, and I'll drag in a different configuration. It's going to smart mate into position also. If you're going to have more than one referenced entity, the name comes into play. If we want these two parts to automatically mate, you have to have a mate reference defined in each part. The name has to be the same, the number of entities has to be the same, and the type of mate has to be the same also. So this blocky part is inserted into an assembly and positioned someplace. And then this part on the left needs to be inserted later and mated to it. And what we want is this round face is going to go in this round hole, and the flat face needs to touch this flat face. Because of this recess in here, I really don't have just one single edge that I could pick like we did with that bolt. So it's really going to require two selections. A selection for concentric and a selection for coincident. So now the name's going to come into play. The mate reference needs to exist in both parts. This one's already been done to save a little bit of time. If I edit the definition of it, it has a name, large diameter, and two references. This round face is the first reference. It's defined to be concentric with any type of alignment. The flat face is the second selection. It's defined to be coincident, anti-aligned. Anti-aligned meaning it faces towards its mating part. And you can have multiple mate references. So I have another one for small diameter, and it's the same idea. This round hole is concentric with any type of alignment, flat face, coincident, anti-aligned. So this part's been done. If we want this part to automatically mate to it, we have to do the same thing. Add a mate reference. The name has to be exactly the same as well as the references. This needs to be concentric with any type of alignment. This face, coincident, anti-aligned. Repeat the command. Small diameter. This face, concentric, any type of alignment. This face, coincident, anti-aligned.
Is there any way to copy those expectations?
I don't believe so. I don't think so, no. And it has to be perfect. I've done this more than once. If everything doesn't match perfectly, it just doesn't add any mates. It just drops it on the screen. Not positive if it's case sensitive or not. Not sure. So I'm going to drag this over, add it to our library folder, open up an assembly. Now the assembly already has one of these parts in it, and now we want to insert that cylindrical part. And when we drag it, you see it snaps into that hole. I drag another one, and it's not snapping in there, which means I typed in something wrong, probably. And that's all it is. The name has to match, and the number of entities, and the type of mate. So if parts always mate a certain way, and you know most parts can be mated completely with just 3 mates. 3 mates will fully locate a part. Parts always go together the same kind of way. You put those mate references on there, and they'll just snap right where you want them every single time. So it can really save you a lot of time.
What were the 3 things that had to match? Name?
The name has to match. Question is it case sensitive? I'm not sure, but the name has to match. The number of referenced entities has to be the same, 1, 2, or 3, and the mate has to be the same. Concentric, coincident, what have you.
And the sequence has to be the same.
And the sequence, yeah, it has to be the same order. And I would go back and fix that to show you where the error is, but You know, it's one of those three things I just missed, and because of the time, we don't have time for that. So we're almost finished. Back to the original assembly I had open. I have a folder where I've placed these parts that we reuse over and over. So we'll go ahead and add that file location. And it's in this folder that I just added that I have all of this setup equipment that we reuse, blocks, pushers, clamps, etc. Some of these parts I've added, mate references, just the ones that I plan to show you about. And let's assume that this block and the related parts are not here yet, and I have just a display state that has those parts removed. So we're now creating the assembly, setting up to machine this part. We need to insert some more hardware. So we go to our library. Here's our locating block. The mate references are set up so it snaps to any one of the slots I want to put it in. Put one there. We need a bolt. The bolt has mate references on it, so it snaps into position, has configurations, so we can select the configuration that we want. The bolt screws into a key. The key has mate references, snaps it into position, so now it's sliding in the slot here. And as far as the rest, I'm just going to smart mate, attach the key to the bolt. And then the last thing is just a regular mate. The block needs to mate up to the part like that. So hopefully you can see how much time you can save by using mate references. So we've looked at the design library, reusing features, sketches, and parts.